Okay. Yeah. Unit 1, lesson 16, analyze plot elements. So we're, started on the second half of Unit 1 dealing with fiction, where the first half was, nonfiction. So finally kind of moving into some new territory. It's still going to feel familiar. And I think a lot of this is a bit intuitive because we're all familiar with stories. We're all familiar with storytelling. And this just kind of is going to define some of those elements that we encounter all the time. So we'll open up the student book here, lesson 16. Okay. And for today's lesson, by the time we complete this one, you will be able to define the terms plot, exposition, complication, climax, and resolution. And then we'll use plot elements to analyze a story. All right, let's take a look at our audio here. All right, here we go.
The plot of a story consists of a series of events and how the characters or people in the story face these events. Authors use specific plot elements to tell the events in a particular order. The author sets the scene at the beginning with the exposition, which provides background and introduces some or all of the characters and details. The story then introduces complications or difficulties that the characters in the story must confront and overcome. Complications are often the result of conflicts between two or more characters, or within one character. The complications are most intense at the story's climax, which usually comes near the end. Complications are resolved, happily or unhappily, in the resolution at the end of the story.
Yeah, and we all are familiar with this one way or the other. And it doesn't matter if it's a written story or if it's television or a movie. Stories all have these similar elements. So the plot. If you're telling somebody about like a television show or a book you've read or a movie you watched, you tend to summarize it using the plot points, right? So those main events and the series of events that are happening to the characters. Right, you're pointing out sort of the big stuff to explain it. Exposition in storytelling, in writing, one of the things they say is show, don't tell. Good writers will limit the amount of exposition they use sometimes. If you're introduce a character and you're talking about their background, right? It's not part of the main story, then that's all exposition. If you're setting the scene, if you're, describing, particularly, this is really important in like science fiction and fantasy, where we're dealing with another type of world, something that's unfamiliar, then you might need a lot of explanation. But a lot of authors will weave that into the story as they go, so you don't get into like a whole 4 pages of the history of something or other to lose people in that. But exposition is important because it gives you that background, and it may be the way that you introduce characters, right? Yeah, it's lesson 16. Yeah. So then your characters are going to have some type of struggle, right? That's the complications. That's how you move the story along. They have to overcome things. They get involved in some type of struggles. That's the complications. That's the that middle of the story. And then whether it's conflicts or tension, all of that is part of the complications. And then you get to the climax of the story, right? Whatever that may be. That's the peak when the ebb and flow of the plot comes to a head, and that major scene. So
excuse me.
Uh-huh.
Can I say something?
Sure.
I don't know if I'm behind. I think we are in lesson 15. I don't know.
Lesson 15?
Yeah.
Let me take a look here. Did we not do compare and contrast yet? We did cause and effect last, didn't we? And then we're supposed to do compare and contrast. Okay. Lola, let's go ahead. We'll stick with lesson 16. Tomorrow we'll do lesson 15. All right. I skipped ahead. Yeah, that's my fault. Thank you for pointing that
so
out.
I was confused.
I'm sorry, yo. I guess I'm the confused one. Yeah, so
I thought we were just skipping that one or something because I noticed it too. I was like,
yeah, that's on me. They're starting to run together here because we, like I mentioned, you guys have done cause and effect and compare and contrast over and over again. And I was just happy to see something different, I think. We'll follow up with that tomorrow. Thanks for pointing that out, Grace. You're right. Yeah, we did skip a lesson here. But yeah, let's keep going on with lesson 16.
All right.
I was just so happy to get to something new. Okay. So anyway, yeah, so it's following on, right? So our struggle, the complications that the characters encounter. And then the climax, is whatever the peak moment is. So, the blowing up the Death Star, right? The trench run in Star Wars, and the end of Avengers Endgame, when everybody comes together and they're fighting Thanos, stuff like that. That is the climactic moment. And then afterwards, is the resolution and how you tie everything up. What is the end result? So, thinking about sort of like cause and effect, that's the final effect of whatever that climactic moment is in your movie. All right. So, and again, that's all should be kind of intuitive. We understand these things a lot of times without actually giving, definitions to them. All right. So I'll read off the first thing here. We'll get into some reading here in a little bit. So Mr. Hale goes to the house. This says, "Well, Mr. Hale," said the county attorney, "tell just what happened when you came here yesterday morning." "I didn't see or hear anything. I knocked at the door. I knocked again, louder, and I thought I heard somebody say, 'Come in.' I wasn't sure. I'm not sure yet, but I opened the door, this door," jerking a hand toward the door by which the two women stood. "And there, in that rocker," pointing to it, "sat Mrs. Wright. I thought of Harry and the team outside, so I said, a little sharp, 'Can't I see John?' 'No,' says she, kind of dull-like. 'Ain't he home?' says I. Then she looked at me. 'Yes,' says she, 'he's home.' 'Then why can't I see him?' I asked her, out of patience with her now. ''Cause he's dead,' says she, just as quiet and dull, and fell to pleating her apron." So that's from A Jury of Her Peers by Susan Glaspell, 1917. And our box up here, talks about exposition. The story's exposition. A witness, Mr. Hale retells events that set up the story's plot and provide background information. And then secondly, this news and the way in which it is explained present the story's main plot complication. So the main plot complication, right, is that that he's dead. John is dead. All right. So let's go on over to lesson 16. I tell you, I gotta be careful. I think this is the second time I've done that. I skipped the unit review on social studies, so I got to be careful here, watching myself on which lessons we're on. So our content topic. So we think of plot as rising and falling action, right? If you think about a whole story, right, there's this ebb and flow, there's these peaks and valleys. The action rises to a climax, then it resolves. During the rising action, you may ask, what will happen next? During the falling action, you may ask how the story will end. So all these events lead up, and then you have your final climactic point. You may have moments of tension that rise, but then finally you have that one peak, and then the final resolution. So that falling action is what they're talking about. You have this sort of like mini resolution as you go along. If you have like a fight scene or something, then afterwards, how does that resolve? How does that lead to the next moment? And they all thread together throughout the plot. And that's part of the plot points that you would explain to somebody if you're summarizing a story. Edda, you want to read question 1 for us?
Okay, what complications does Mr. Hale discover at Mrs. Wright's house? A, he sees that Miss Wright is ill. B, he learns that John is dead. C, no one can answer the door. Or D, Mr. Wright cannot speak. D.
B, right? B as in boy. He learns that John is dead towards the end. That's the complication. It's like, why can't I speak to him? Well, he's dead. That's why you can't speak to him. B as in boy. Analyzing plot points there.
So we are going to just start in 16 and then go back to 15 tomorrow?
We'll go back to 15 tomorrow. Yeah, we'll just continue on here. It'll be easier. We already covered that. And then, and again, because the other stuff is something that you've already sort of encountered with nonfiction. So I figure we'll get a break from that and at least get a taste of something new here. All right. So let's trade off here. I'll start reading and then we'll work through these paragraphs here. So news comes to a grieving wife. That's our title here. And the first paragraph says, 2 young women sat together by the fireside, nursing their mutual and peculiar sorrows. They were the recent brides of 2 brothers, a sailor and a landsman, and 2 successive days had brought tidings of the death of each by the chances of Canadian warfare and the tempestuous Atlantic. They joined their hearts and wept together silently. And I'll just point out, tempestuous is like a really bad windy storm. A tempest, right, is a bad windy storm, like what we had on Saturday. We had a tempest here in the Columbus area. Let's see. Grace, you want to read that second paragraph?
Okay. Time went on, and their usual hour of repose arrived. Then the widowed ones retired to their own rooms. Mary soon sank into temporary forgetfulness, while Margaret became more disturbed and feverish as the night advanced.
All right, good. Sasha Gay, you want to read 3?
While Margaret groaned in bitterness, she heard a knock at the street door. Seizing the lamp from the hearth, she hastened to the window that overlooked the street door. A man in a broad-brimmed hat looked upward to discover whom his application had arose. Margaret knew him as a friendly innkeeper of the town.
Okay. And I got 4. So what would you have, Goodman Parker? Cried the widow. Edda, number 5.
Is it you, Mistress Margaret? Replied the innkeeper. I was afraid it might be your sister Mary, for I hate to see a young woman in trouble when I have not a word of comfort to whisper her.
Grace?
For heaven's sake. For heaven's sake, what news do you bring? Screamed Margaret.
Sasha Gay? 7.
Why, there has been an express through the town within this half hour, said Goodman Parker, traveling from the eastern jurisdiction with letters from the governor and council. He tarried at my house to refresh himself with a drop of a morsel, and I asked him what tidings on the frontiers. He told me he had the better in the skirmish you heard of, and that 13 men reported slain are well and sound, and your husband among them. I judged you would not mind being broke of your rest. And so I stepped over to tell you good night.
Etta, number 8.
Okay. So saying the honest man departed, and his lantern gleamed along the street, bringing to view indistinct shapes of things, and the fragments of a world like order glimmering through chaos or memory roaming over the past. But Margaret stayed not to watch these pictures. What is it? Picturesque?
Picturesque.
Well,
Picturesque.
picturesque. Okay. Picturesque effects. Joy flashed into her heart and lightened it up at once. And breathless, she flew to the bedside of her sister. She paused, however, at the door of the chamber while a thought of pain broke in upon her.
And then I'll finish off here. Poor Mary, said she to herself. Shall I waken her to feel her sorrow sharpened by my happiness? No, I will keep it till the morrow. I see, Christiana, you just joined us. We're on lesson 16. I messed up, and Grace pointed out that we had skipped lesson 15. So just make sure that you're in unit 1, lesson 16. We just started the quiz here. All right. Okay. Yeah, we'll do lesson 15 tomorrow. Just make sure you're in the right spot. All right, and question 2 then. Which sentence from the story belongs to the exposition? A, time went on and their usual hour of repose arrived. B, while Margaret groaned in bitterness, she heard a knock at the street door. C, they were the recent brides of 2 brothers and the tempestuous Atlantic. ... D, a man in a broad-brimmed hat looked upward to discover whom his application had aroused. So what explains the situation here? Or gives you background?
C.
Yeah, C is in cat, right? That gives you more information about the situation, right? These 2, Mary and Margaret, were recent brides, and then that further explanation that they had both lost their husbands recently. One obviously a soldier fighting, and the other a sailor, right? So they lose their husbands both around the same time early on in the story. So C is in cat for 2, and 3. Etta, read number 3 for us.
Okay. What complication does Goodman Parker's news to Margaret reveal? A, Margaret's husband is actually alive. B, married husband is dead. C, 13 men have been killed. Or D, Margaret's husband has returned to her. B.
A. So that is the new complication. So the exposition, right, establishes that they've both lost their husbands. It's weird because complication sounds negative, but it's just a point of tension in the story. So when she hears that her husband's alive, right? That's like a new twist. That's a new complication in their story. And then it's, going to be worsened by the fact that how is she going to explain that to Mary, right? Now it's like Mary has still lost her husband, but mine is going to be back. So A for number 3. And number 4, Grace, I'll read number 4.
Okay. Margaret screams at Goodman Packer to find out his news. In terms of plot events, the most likely reason for Goodman Packer to delay telling Margaret the news is to A, create humor in the story by showing that Goodman Packer is long-winded B, add another complication in the plot. C, provide additional exposition by giving more insights into Margaret's character. And D, heighten the suspense of the plot. Is it B?
It's D. So this delay, right, helps build that tension where you're like, just tell me what's going on, you know? That's yeah, D is in dog. So it's going to, you know, you're building the tension, you're building the suspense by delaying, you know, what the news is. So yeah, that's all to heighten the suspense of the plot. So D is in dog for 4. And Sasha Gay, you want to read 5 for us?
What new complication is introduced after Goodman Parker shares his news? A, Margaret rushes to Mary's bedside. B, Margaret waits to tell Mary the news. C, Goodman Parker leaves. D, Margaret feels a flash of joy. Is it A?
It's B. So yeah, she's going to go to her bedside, right? But she just goes to her door, and then the realization sets in. She's like, how am I going to tell Mary that my husband is okay when hers is still dead? So that's a new complication, right? So B is in boy for number 5. You know, complications build on one another. So the first complication is the fact that, oh, Margaret's husband is alive, right? That's a new wrinkle. And now adding to that is the fact that she's going to have to explain that to Mary. And, you know, she's having a little turmoil there because she's happy for herself, but she's still, you know, upset for her friend. So another level of that complication there. So yeah, that's all for the quiz. Make sure everybody has the answers there. So 1 was B as in boy. 2, C for cat. 3 is A. 4, D as in dog. And 5 is B for boy. Okay. All right, and moving right along to the workbook. So lesson 16, analyzing plot elements here. Okay. And just reiterating that idea, right? So plot of the story is made of a series of events. Plot elements include exposition, which is background information, whether it's about the characters, whether it's a history of a place, just giving that needed information to help move the story along. And then the complications. So what kind of struggle, conflict is the characters going through? There's going to be multiple complications that are built on until we get to the climax, whatever the main event is in the story that happens, and then that leads to the resolution, right? The close. And those are typically right towards the end of your story. And that says the exposition provides the story's background and sets up the events to come. Complications are difficulties that characters or people in the story face and try to overcome. Complications are often the result of conflict, right? It could be between multiple characters. The conflict can maybe arise from a moral dilemma. There's all these different ways that storytellers will create complications for their characters. And then, of course, the climax is the point of the highest tension. So there's all these peaks and valleys. We'll run up against a plot moving up and down, but then that final climax is that highest point of tension. And then you'll have the resolution at the end of the story that ties up all the loose ends there. All right, and I'll read this first one here. So the problem is resolved. It says, there's all those poor dear lasses. There's nobody but me left to remember. And soon there'll not be even that. Sometimes they seem to be pleading, not just to be forgotten, so I have to be keeping them alive in my head. My grief, that I'll have to be leaving them. They'll die now, for no man lives who can remember them anymore. Anna leaned forward with girlish eagerness. Auntie Margaret, she breathed with new tenderness. There's many a day left you yet. I'll be sitting here aside of you every evening at twilight, and you can be showing me the lasses you have in mind. I'll see them just as clear as yourself, for I have a place in my head where pictures come as thick and sharp as stars on a frosty night when I get thinking. Then, with me ever calling them up, they'll be dancing and stravaging about till doomsday. So the old woman had her heart's desire. Stravaging, that's one of those old words. It means sort of to wander about aimlessly. So it says here, the exposition reveals that the speaker's sadness, she worries the people she knew and remembers will never be remembered again after she is gone. So that's what's troubling her. And then the second speaker, Anna, offers a solution to the conflict facing her aunt. This offer marks the story's climax. So she's telling them, that's how we will carry on their memory. You tell me their stories, and then they'll live on in me. All right, so let's start the workbook here. And so it says here, be sure to answer fill in the blank questions briefly and precisely. Write no more than one sentence at most. You will not receive more points for a longer answer. It may help you to read the questions first and then read the passage. So I will go ahead and read the passage, but you may need to review it once you have read the question. And we've run into this, right? With, try to be precise. If it's looking for a word that you encountered, in the paragraph or whatever you're reading, make sure you spell it the same way. If it's capitalized, go ahead and make sure you capitalize it, things like that, because they seem to be pretty picky when it comes to the fill in the blank here, probably more so than they need to be. All right, Christiana, could you read number 1 for us?
Okay. The question says, what is the auntie's conflict? A, she wished to regain her youth. B, she wants her niece to help write her memories. C, she fears dying alone. D, she fears no one will remember her memories. Is it a D?
Yeah, D is in dog, right? So she's concerned about that. That's something we can all relate to, I think, about loss of memory and the memory of others. How are you going to pass that down? So and again, here the same passage. So this young lady is going to help her aunt carry on memories of those that have come before her. Etta, would you like to read number 2 for us? Oh, maybe not. Let's go with Grace.
Okay. The aunt is happy about the resolution because A, her past will remain a secret. B, she is comforted by her niece's offer. C, she and Anna will create photo albums. And D, her niece will move in with her. B?
Yeah, she's comforted by that idea right there at the end, right? So B as in boy, that's your resolution for this point. She's upset that she's not going to be able to pass on these memories, that all these people that come before her have been forgotten. Her daughter, or I'm sorry, her niece, I suppose, because it's Auntie Margaret, is telling her that, I will sit with you. You can tell me their stories and they'll live on with me. And that's the resolution at the end. So the old woman had her heart's desire. So B as in boy, right? She is comforted by that news. Okay. The canary provides a clue. Let's take some turns reading here. So on number 3 here, I'll start off. Always remember your title too. So number one says, when the two women were alone in Minnie Wright's kitchen, Martha Hale said low and slowly, she liked the bird. She was going to bury it in that pretty box. Christiana, read for us. Number two.
Okay. Miss Helen or
Hales.
okay, Miss Hale's eyes made a slow whip of the room, as if seeing what that kitchen had meant through all the years. No, right? Right, or would be like a bird. She said after that, a thing that sang. She used to sing. He liked that too. Her voice tightens.
Titan. Yeah.
Tighten.
Good deal. Etta, you want to take next line?
Number 3, right?
Yep.
Miss Peters, the sheriff's wife, moved uneasily and replied, "Of course, we don't know who killed the bird."
All right. Let's see. I got number 4 here. I knew John Wright was Mrs. Hale's answer. Grace, 5.
Okay. It was an awful thing was done in this house that night, Mrs. Hale, said the sheriff's wife, killing a man while he slept, slipping a thing round his neck that choked the life out of him.
Okay. Sasha Gay, next one.
Mrs. Hale had not moved. There had been years and years of nothing. To sing to you, it would be awful. Still, after the bird was still. Still, after the bird was still.
Yeah. Christiana, next one. Nope, maybe not. Okay, I'll go ahead and finish off here. So they stopped and busied themselves as they heard the sound of the men coming back down the stairs. They waited until the sheriff had followed the county attorney through the kitchen and into the other room. Then the two women were alone in that kitchen for one final moment. Martha Hale sprang up, her hands tight together, looking at that other woman with whom it rested. Slowly, unwillingly, Mrs. Peters turned her head until their eyes met. There was a moment when they held each other in a steady, burning look, in which there was no evasion nor flinching. Then Martha Hale's eyes pointed the way to the basket in which was hidden the thing that would make certain the conviction of Minnie Wright, that woman who was not there and yet who had been there with them all through that hour. For a moment, Mrs. Peters did not move, and then she did it. With a rush forward, she threw back the quilt pieces, got the box, tried to put it in her handbag. It was too big. Desperately, she opened it, started to take the bird out, but there she broke. She could not touch the bird. She stood there, helpless, foolish. There was the sound of a knob turning in the inner door. Martha Hale snatched the box from the sheriff's wife and got in the pocket of her big coat just as the sheriff and the county attorney came back into the kitchen. Mrs. Hale's hand was against the pocket of her coat. So from A Jury of Her Peers by Susan Glaspel. So I'll go ahead and read the first question here. So according to the women's actions, which complication most likely arose before the beginning of this excerpt? The woman stole a canary from a friend. B, the sheriff arrested Mr. Peters. C, the sheriff and attorney questioned the women. Or D, the women found a dead canary in a box.
D.
It's D. D as in dog, right? Because at the beginning there, we hear, whoops. Yeah, when the two women were alone in Minnie Wright's kitchen, Martha said low and slowly, she liked the bird. She was going to bury it in that pretty box. So you know right away that they had already discovered the dead canary. So D as in dog for number 3. Number 4, Christiana, you want to take number 4?
Number 4. The woman hear the sound of knock.
Yep.
What's that word? No. Okay. Turning in an inner door. Stop it. Paragraph 10. This event could best be described as A. Complication. B. Exposition.
Yep. Exposition.
C. The plot. D. The revolution. Is it B?
It's A, right? It's a complication, because now they're worried they're going to get caught, right? There's that moment of tension, like what's going on? So A, when they hear that turn, that's a complication. That's throwing another struggle towards them. All right. Etta, you want to take number 5?
What is the climax of this passage? A. Miss Peters stands hopeless. B. Martha Hale's hand hides the box in the pocket of her coat. C. Martha Hale snatches the box from Miss Peters and puts it in her pocket. Or D. The men enter the kitchen. D.
C. So Martha snatches the box from Mrs. Peters. So that right, when she does that action and hides the box right in her coat, that's the climax. Because the resolutions afterwards, they basically have it hidden. So C as in cat for number 5. All right, number 6. Grace, you want to take number 6 for us?
Okay. On the basis of this passage, which is the most likely resolution? A. Mrs. Hale will tell the sheriff and county attorney about the canary. The sheriff and the county attorney will remain unaware of the canary. C. Mrs. Peters will tell the sheriff and county attorney that Mrs. Hale is hiding the canary. And then D. The sheriff and the county attorney will notice the box in Mrs. Hale's pocket. Is it B or D?
Yeah, it's B, right?
B.
So it really could be D if you think about it. They could notice the box, but there's more of a idea here, that they're not going to find out about it, that it's being well concealed here. So B as in boy for number 6. And okay, so new passage, and we are back to Mary and Margaret and their dead husbands, or are we? So I'll start off here. We'll trade off a little bit reading. So on number 1 here, again, there was a quick peal upon the street door. Fearing that her sister would also be disturbed, Mary wrapped herself in a cloak and hood, took the lamp from the hearth, and hastened to the window. By some accident, it had been left unfastened and yielded easily to her hand. Christiana, you want to read number 2?
Okay. Who is there? Asked Mary, trembling as she looked forth.
Okay. Grace, you want to take 3?
Okay. The storm was over and the moon was up. It shone up broken clouds above and below upon houses black with moisture. A young man in a sailor's dress, wet as if he had come out of the depth of the sea, stood alone under the window. Mary recognized him as one whose livelihood was gained by short voyage along the coast. Nor did she forget that, previous to her marriage, he had been an unsuccessful wooer of her own.
Okay. Wooer being a, how can you put it? Somebody trying to court her. I'm trying to think of the word you'd use in modern time. A gentleman caller. It's something like that. It's that idea. He was interested in her. She not so much him, right? Unsuccessful wooer. He was trying to woo her for her attention. And then 4, real quick. What do you seek here, Stephen? Said she. And Etta, you want to read 5?
Cheer up, Mary, for I seek to comfort you, answered the rejected lover. You must know I got home not 10 minutes ago, and the first thing my good mother told me was the news about your husband. So without saying a word to the old woman, I clapped on my hat and ran out of the house. I could not have slept a wink before speaking to you, Mary, for the sake of old times.
Okay. Sasha Gay, you want to take 6?
Stephen, I thought better of you, exclaimed the widow, preparing to close the lattice.
And Christiana, 7.
Number 7.
Yeah.
Number 7. But stop and hear my story out, cried the young sailor. I tell you, we spoke a brain. Is it
Brig.
word?
Yeah,
Brig
brig.
yesterday afternoon, bound from old England. And who do you think I saw standing on deck? Is it deck?
Yep.
Okay. Well and hearty. Only a bit thinner than he was 5 months old. 5 months ago.
Yep. All right. And 8, I got Mary leaned from the window, but could not speak. Why? It was your husband himself, continued the generous seaman. He and 3 others saved themselves on a spar when the Blessing turned bottom upwards. The brig will beat into the bay by daylight. With this wind, and you'll see him here tomorrow. There's the comfort I bring you, Mary. And so, good night. Etta, want to read 9?
He hurried away while Mary watched him with a doubt of waking reality. That seemed stronger or weaker as he alternately entered the shade of the houses or emerged into the broad streaks of moonlight. Gradually, however, a blessed flood of conviction swelled into her heart in strength enough to overwhelm her, but its increase being more abrupt.
All right. Yeah. So now, as it turns out, Mary and Margaret's husband both still alive. Yay. Yeah. So, he's apparently survived, storm must have capsized the boat or something. The Blessing, right? You can see it's capitalized. That's the name of the boat. So it turned bottom upwards. He managed to save himself. And this former unsuccessful wooer has delivered the message because he's also in the Navy or sailor and has, actually seen the husband. So, question here says the passage states that Stephen was Mary's unsuccessful wooer. The information about Mary and Stephen's past is part of the story's A, exposition, B, conflict, C, climax, or D, resolution.
See?
It's A, the exposition, right? We're getting some background information between the two. And, exposition doesn't always have to be, like a whole paragraph or, a bunch of sentences about something. Unsuccessful wooer is telling you something about their past, these two people's past. This guy was, a former, he was interested in her and, was trying to gain her attention. And so the whole thing is playing out that way, right? So it's A, exposition for number 7. Okay. Grace, you want to read number 8 for us? Oop, going too far.
Okay. According to the details in the passage, what is the most likely source of Mary's conflict? A, she still loves Stephen. B, Stephen has disappointed her. C, she believes her husband has died. And D, Stephen's mother has gossiped about Mary. See?
Yeah, right. That's her the conflict that she's experiencing, right? She still believes her husband is dead after the accident, after the tempestuous storm. So C for cat for number, is that 8, right? Yeah, number 8. All right, number 9.
You said 8 was what?
8 is C as in cat. All right. And I got it. A complication in the passage is that at first, Mary doubts Stephen's reasons for visiting her by saying, I thought better of you, paragraph 6. What does Mary mean? So A, Mary thinks Stephen is there to tell her more news of her husband. B, Mary thinks Stephen should have waited until a better time to visit her. C, Mary thinks Stephen has come to console her and has romantic intentions. Or D, Mary disapproves of the way Stephen refers to his mother. So C, right? Where she says, I thought better of you. So it sounds like, Stephen just went home, got off the ship, heard that this is what, Mary is thinking, right? That he got off the ship, went home, heard that Mary's husband was dead, and just thought he would go pay her a visit, because that, and that would be her thought, because he had tried to woo her before, right? That he wanted her romantic attention. So, you would think the worst of somebody that comes on your door would be like, hey, I just heard your husband's dead. So that's kind of the thoughts there. The complication is, she thinks he's there to for his own purposes and not to actually give her good news. All right, and 10, Christiana, you want to read number 10 for us?
Okay, number 10, based on the base of the details in the passage, what is the most likely ending? A, Stephen will ask Mary to marry him. B, Mary's husband will come back. C, Mary will leave her husband. And D, Mary will rescue Stephen will rescue Mary's husband. Is it the D?
B.
B, yeah, B as in boy. So Mary's husband will come home. And it mentions here, right, that the brig will beat into the bay by daylight with this wind, and you'll see him here tomorrow. There's comfort I bring you, Mary. So yeah, he's saying that he'll probably be home tomorrow. So B as in boy there. That's the most likely ending. That's what's going to happen after this. We've resolved that tension. The climactic part, at least here, right? We're getting these little bits of the story. So it's for our purposes, right? The climax is when Stephen reveals to Mary that her husband is still alive. If we were reading the whole story, there would be a different climax towards the end here. But for our purposes, looking at these little pieces, that's basically our ending for now. All right. And we've got one more passage here. So we'll split this up again. Title here is The Story of an Hour. And number 1 says, because it was known that Mrs. Mallard had heart trouble, great care was taken to break to her as gently as possible the news of her husband's death. It was her sister Josephine who told her, veiled hints that revealed in half concealing. Her husband's friend Richards was there too, near her. It was he who had been in the newspaper office when intelligence of the railroad disaster was received, with Brentley Mallard's name leading the list of killed. Etta, you want to take number 2?
She wept at once with sudden wild abandonment in her sister's arms. When the storm of grief had spent itself, she went away to her room alone. She sank into an armchair, pressed down by a physical exhaustion that haunted her body and seemed to reach into her soul. She sat quiet, motionless, except when a sob came up into her throat and shook her. She was young with a fair, calm face whose lines bespoke repression and even a certain strength, but now there was a dull stare in her eyes.
All right. Grace, you want to take the next one?
Okay. There was something coming to her and she was waiting for it. Fearfully. What was it? She was beginning to recognize this thing that was approaching, and she was striving to beat it back with her will. When she abandoned herself, a little whispered would escape her lips. She said it over and over under her breath. Free, free, free. The vacant stare and the look of terror that had followed it went from her eyes. They stayed keen and bright.
Okay. Sasha Gay, paragraph 4.
She knew that she would weep again when she saw the face that had never looked safe with love upon her, fixed and gray and dead. But she was beyond that bitter moment, a long procession of years to come that would belong to her absolutely. There would be no one to live for. She would live for herself. She had loved him sometimes, often she had not. What did it matter?
Okay. Christiana, number 5.
Number 5, she arose at length and opened the door. There was a feverish triumph in her eyes, and she carried herself like a goddess of victory. As she descended the stairs, Richard stood waiting for them at the bottom.
Etta, back up to you.
Someone was opening the front door with a key. It was Brentley Mallard who entered a little travel stain, carrying his gripsack and umbrella. He had been far from the scene of accident and did not even know there had been one. He stood amazed at Josephine's piercing cry, at Richard's quick motion to screen him from the view of his wife.
And I'll read off the last ones here. So, but Richards was too late. When the doctors came, they said she had died of heart disease, a joy that kills. And our first question then, it says, in the opening line, the narrator says that Mrs. Mallard had heart trouble. And this plot element, is this plot element an example of exposition, climax, or resolution?
Is it exposition?
Exposition, yeah. EXPOSITION. Right, so that's background information. They're telling us an existing heart condition is going to help give us background on that character. So exposition for 11 and number 12. So as she sits in her room, Mrs. Mallard begins to recognize something and strives to beat it back with her will. Is this plot event an example of conflict, climax, or resolution? What would you say is is happening with her?
Climax?
Resolution.
Conflict. It's an internal conflict, right? That's something else. CONFLICT. FLICT. It doesn't have to be something between two people, like I mentioned, right? It can be an internal conflict, something that you're fighting with on the inside, something you're struggling with. So here, that's what's happening to Mrs. Mallard. So conflict, CONFLICT for 12. 13. She said it over and over under her breath: free, free, free. So does this line represent conflict or the climax of the story?
Climax.
Climax, right? And again, it's different depending on the type of story you're reading. How grand is it going to be? If it's a intimate story, if it's about just one person or a small set of people, the climax might not be, like winning World War II or something like that. It's a much more nuanced, sort of idea there. And then the final question: do the events in paragraphs 3, 4, and 5 support or contradict the ending statement that Mrs. Mallard died of joy that kills? So, she knew that she would weep again when she saw the face that had never looked, save with love upon her, fixed and gray and dead. But she saw beyond that bitter moment a long procession of years to come that would belong to her absolutely. There would be no one to live for. She would live for herself. So what do you think?
Or
Contradict?
Contradict.
Yeah. It's actually contradicts. It's a little bit of a bizarre ending. Yeah, so number 14 is contradict. So there's also irony in that, right? Which is another sort of narrative device. So, irony being something that, kind of happens in sort of a strange way. So, she's looking forward to these years. She says she's free of this person, and then she herself dies. There's a bit of irony in that. So 14, contradict, right? Let's see here. Everybody got all the answers? Need to follow up with any of those on the workbook here. Everybody got everything? All right, I'll take that as a yes. So